They say time waits for no one. But what happens when time refuses to move at all? For one family, a seemingly innocent antique clock became the key to their darkest nightmare. My name is Rachel, and this story happened when I was 34. I'd recently moved into a new home with my husband, Michael, and our 8-year-old daughter, Emma. While shopping for furniture, I stumbled upon an antique shop tucked away in a quiet alley. Among the dusty shelves and vintage trinkets, I found it. A beautiful grandfather clock with intricate carvings of moons and stars along its wooden frame. The shopkeeper warned me not to wind it, claiming it was unpredictable. I thought he was just trying to add mystique to an expensive item, so I bought it anyway. That evening, we set up the clock in the living room. As the pendulum swung, the gentle ticking filled the house with an oddly comforting rhythm. But by midnight, the air had grown colder, and the ticking seemed louder, almost deafening. When I checked the time, the clock had stopped at 12:15. The next morning, Michael noticed something strange. No matter how many times we wound the clock, it refused to move past 12:15. That night, I woke up to the sound of Emma crying in her room. When I went to check on her, she was sitting upright in bed, pointing at the corner of the room. "There's someone there," she whispered, her voice trembling. The corner was empty, but when I turned back to Emma, her eyes were wide with terror. "They're watching us," she said. The following day, things got even stranger. I noticed that the same events seemed to repeat. Michael drinking his coffee, Emma playing with her toys, but always in the exact same way. When I checked the clock, it still read 12:15. Suddenly, the hands moved backward, and the room grew dark. That night, as I was winding the clock, I noticed something strange in the glass panel. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but the figure in the glass didn't match my movements. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing hollow eyes. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice low and distorted. From that night on, the clock began chiming at 12:15, even though we hadn't set it. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows in the house seemed to stretch and move on their own. One evening, Emma said she saw a man standing by the clock, watching her. "He said he wants us to stay forever," she told me, her voice trembling. Desperate for answers, I inspected the clock more closely and found a hidden compartment at its base. Inside was an old yellowed note that read, "Time belongs to him. Once wound, the cycle begins. Do not try to stop it." That night, the clock chimed 12:15 again, and the house was plunged into darkness. The air grew heavy, and the shadows in the room coalesced into a single form. A tall, cloaked figure with a skeletal hand pointing at me. "Your time is up," it said, its voice echoing through the house. The clock's pendulum swung violently, and the ticking grew deafening. I grabbed the clock and smashed it onto the floor, the glass shattering as the pendulum stopped. The figure let out a deafening scream before dissolving into the shadows. When the lights came back on, the air felt lighter, and the clock was gone, reduced to splinters and ash. We moved out of the house a week later, unable to shake the lingering unease. I later found an article about the clock's origins. It had been owned by a wealthy family in the 1800s who mysteriously vanished after buying it. To this day, I refuse to keep any kind of clock in my home. Sometimes, though, I still hear the faint sound of ticking when the house is silent. If you ever come across an antique clock that feels Wrong. Trust your instincts. Time may not wait for anyone, but some clocks hold more than just the hours. They say libraries are places of knowledge. But what happens when the stories come to life? For one curious student, visiting an abandoned library meant stepping into a world of terror they could never escape. My name is Ethan, and this happened 2 years ago. I was working on my thesis about lost architecture, and during my research, I stumbled across mentions of Ashwood Library, a building that had been abandoned for decades. The library had closed after a mysterious fire in 1957, but rumors claimed it housed rare, one-of-a-kind books. No one knew why it hadn't been demolished, but locals avoided the area, calling it cursed. I thought it was just superstition, until I went there. The library stood at the edge of town, hidden behind overgrown trees and crumbling fences. Its once grand entrance was now covered in ivy, the massive wooden doors slightly ajar. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the faint scent of burnt paper lingered in the air. The shelves were still full, lined with books covered in dust and cobwebs. "It's like a time capsule," I whispered, running my fingers along the spines of the books. But something about the silence felt wrong. I found a book lying open on a table in the center of the room. Its pages were blank, except for a single sentence written in neat handwriting. "Welcome to your story." Before I could process what it meant, the words began to shift, rearranging themselves into paragraphs. The text described someone walking into an abandoned library, and it perfectly matched what I had just done. As I flipped through the pages, I heard faint whispers, soft and indistinct, coming from the shelves. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, overlapping into an eerie chorus. "You shouldn't be here," they said, their voices echoing through the room. I turned to leave, but the doors were gone, replaced by endless rows of shelves. Desperate to find an exit, I wandered through the aisles, but the shelves seemed to move on their own, closing off paths and creating new ones. The books on the shelves began to hum, their pages fluttering even though there was no breeze. One book fell to the floor, its cover depicting a shadowy figure standing in a library. When I opened it, I saw myself on the first page, staring down at the book. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see a tall, shadowy figure standing at the end of the aisle. It wore a tattered cloak, and its face was obscured by darkness, but its glowing eyes were fixed on me. "You can't leave until your story is finished," it said, its voice low and distorted. Before I could respond, it dissolved into a cloud of smoke, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. As I moved deeper into the library, the books around me began to open, and figures stepped out of the pages. A knight in rusted armor, a woman in a blood-stained dress, and a child with hollow eyes all emerged, their forms flickering like static. They surrounded me, their voices overlapping. "Finish the story. Finish it before it finishes you." I stumbled upon a massive desk at the center of the library, where a blank book lay open, its pen hovering in the air. The shadowy librarian appeared again, pointing at the book. "Right," it said. "Your story ends here." The whispers grew deafening, and the figures closed in, their faces twisted with anger and fear. Desperate, I picked up the pen and began to write, describing myself escaping the library. The words glowed faintly as I wrote, and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into the air. The moment I finished the last sentence, the library began to shake, and the shelves collapsed around me. I ran toward the entrance, which had reappeared, and burst outside just as the building crumbled into dust. When I turned back, the library was gone, replaced by an empty lot. The book I had written appeared on my desk the next morning, its title reading, "The Library That Reads You." No one believed my story, and every attempt to destroy the book failed. Sometimes, I still hear the whispers when I'm alone, and I wonder if the library is truly gone, or if it's waiting for me to finish another chapter. If you ever come across an abandoned library, don't go inside. Some stories aren't meant to be read, and some endings are written in fear. They say every road leads somewhere, but what happens when the road leads nowhere? For one group of friends, a late-night drive became an endless nightmare they couldn't escape. My name is Mia, and this happened 2 years ago. My friends and I, Jake, Alyssa, and Marcus, were on a road trip through the Midwest. We had left the last town late at night, hoping to reach the next motel before midnight. Jake was driving, Alyssa was in the passenger seat, and Marcus and I were in the back, joking and scrolling through our phones. The GPS told us to take a shortcut down a quiet, 2-lane highway. At first, the road seemed normal, but as the hours passed, something felt wrong. After about 30 minutes, we passed a gas station with a flickering neon sign. It looked abandoned, but we all made the same mental note. Creepy, but cool. An hour later, we passed the same gas station again. "Didn't we already go by this place?" Marcus asked. "Maybe it's just a similar-looking station," Alyssa suggested. But deep down, we all knew it wasn't. The road stretched on, straight and featureless, with no signs or turns. The GPS screen froze, displaying the same set of coordinates no matter how far we drove. Then the radio began to crackle. At first it was static, but soon we heard faint voices, distorted and overlapping, like they were calling out to us. "Turn back, turn back." Jake turned off the radio, but the voices didn't stop. We decided to stop at the gas station the next time we passed it, hoping to figure out what was going on. When we pulled in, the air felt heavy, and the fluorescent lights inside flickered erratically. The station looked identical to before, except now there was a single car parked out front. A rusted sedan with its doors hanging open. Inside, the shelves were covered in dust, and the air reeked of gasoline and mold. Behind the counter was a notebook with a single page torn out. Scrawled on it in shaky handwriting were the words, "The road doesn't let you leave. Don't stop driving." Panicked, we got back in the car and kept driving. But the sense of dread only grew. The road began to change. The trees on either side looked twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Then, in the distance, we saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. "Should we stop?" Jake asked, slowing the car. "No way," I said. "Just drive around them." As we passed, the figure turned to face us. It was a man with hollow eyes and a bloodied face, mouthing the words, "Help me." We sped up, but soon, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, we thought it was another car, but it moved too fast, swerving across the road like it was chasing us. The headlights grew brighter, blinding us, until suddenly they vanished, leaving nothing but darkness behind. As the night dragged on, time seemed to warp. The clock on the dashboard read 3 a.m. for hours, and the moon hung frozen in the sky. Every time we checked our phones, the screens displayed the same message. Turn around, you're running out of time. But when we tried to turn back, the road only looped us back to the gas station, which now looked even more decayed. At one point, Marcus turned to me and froze, his face pale. "What?" I asked. "There's someone in the back seat," he whispered. I whipped around, but no one was there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of cold breath on the back of my neck. The GPS came back to life, displaying a new message. "One of you must leave the car. Only then will the road let the others go." "What does that mean?" Alyssa asked, her voice shaking. As if in response, the car's engine sputtered and the headlights flickered. Desperate to end the nightmare, Jake volunteered to get out of the car. "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," he replied. Before we could stop him, he stepped out onto the road. The moment the door closed, the car started up again, and the road ahead was clear. We begged him to get back in, but he just smiled sadly and waved as the shadow swallowed him. As we drove away, the road began to change. The trees looked normal again. The moon started to move, and the clock on the dashboard ticked forward. When we finally reached the next town, it was nearly dawn. But Jake was gone, and the GPS now displayed a single message. He belongs to the road now. We tried to go back for Jake, but the road no longer existed. Just an overgrown trail leading into the woods. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that highway and see Jake standing on the shoulder, his hollow eyes watching us drive away. I wake up to the sound of tires screeching and whispers in my ear. "Come back. It's not over." If you ever find yourself driving down an unfamiliar road at night, turn back immediately. Some highways don't lead anywhere, and some journeys never let you return.